Boker Tov, good morning everybody. It is wonderful to see everybody back. Our topic today is social media, social justice and the establishment. And I want to take a moment to thank Paul and Yael who are sponsoring today's share as we just moved out of the show brachos of Ben and Essie upon their marriage last Sunday, and it was a tremendous simcha. And Be'ezra Hashem, we should have continued simcha as we see them build their Bayis Ne'eman B'Yisrael. We're based on the values of their parents, their grandparents. Be'ezra Hashem, what a very, very special young couple. Mazal tov, mazal tov. Let's learn. Let's put a little bit into this. So we're going to talk about a topic today which is very important, very relevant. But a lot of times people start this topic and they start talking about platitudes and general ideas. Let's start with a little bit of learning, a little bit of appreciation of learning, and then come down to the applications of this model in our lives. Here's how it starts. So we're going to look at when you think about the space that Korach occupies and his attack on Moshe Rabbeinu or the establishment. It is interesting to wonder to yourself, like, what kind of guarantee must you be looking for in order to do such a thing? I mean, it comes with great risks. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu has, 10 plagues, split the sea, Matan Torah, and you're just Korach. You're just Korach. Now, yes, you're in the mishpacha, but that's not going to get you so far if you're on the wrong side of Moshe Rabbeinu. So what guarantees do you have? So the truth is that Korach did actually have a little bit of a guarantee. He had a crystal ball. And here's how it works. It's embedded deep into Divrei Yamim Aleph, Perek Vav, where most people are not reading. And the reason most people are not reading Divrei Yamim Aleph, Perek Vav is first of all because they haven't got that far enough. That's number one. And that's a pity because Divrei Yamim is fantastic. But another reason is that even those people who get far enough don't read the beginning of Divrei Yamim Aleph, because for the first more than 10 chapters, it's all about names. It's a genealogy. And so for those who are very into mishpachology, then this is where you're at. But for a lot of people, they just miss it. So here's a gem you would miss. Take a look at these psukim where we learn a little bit about Korach and something that's going to be very important about him. So here we go. He says, Ve'ele ha'amdim. These are the appointed ones of V'neim ibn Akasi, Haman, HaMesharer ben Yoel ben Shmuel. Okay, so we have this person whose name is Haman. Haman you should recognize because he is one of the composers of Tehillim. There were 10 composers of Tehillim. David was the editor, but he had there were producers, there were writers who were part of it, and Haman appears a number of times in Tehillim. So Haman was a Levite who was the son of Yoel, the son of Shmuel, ben Elkanah, ben Yerocham, ben Eliel, ben Toich. Wait a second. We know one of those names there. Elkanah we know, right? Because Elkanah was at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel Aleph. And Elkanah had the distinct privilege of being the father of Shmuel, which is why it says in the previous pasuk, Shmuel, right? So Shmuel is the grandfather of Haman, who is a Levi in the Beis Hamikdash. And he is also in this line. Now let's carry on doing his genealogy. Ben Tzuf, Ben Elkanah, so you see a grandparent naming over here. Ben Machas, Ben Amisai, Ben Elkanah, Ben Yoel, Ben Azariah, Ben Sophania, Ben Tachas, Ben Asir, Ben Aviasaph, Ben Korach, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kas, Ben Melevi, Ben Yisrael. There you go, all the way back. So we have Haman all the way back to Yisrael, aka Yaakov Avinu, and now we have the genealogy downwards. So Yaakov Avinu's great grandson was Korach, and Korach's great grandson was Shmuel, leading to Haman as well. So you say, okay, well, how does this help us? So actually, the Midrash Tanchum, as quoted by Rashi, does help us by framing this as the reason why Korach actually was so bold, because as Rashi quotes at the beginning of Parshas Korach, Korach shepikeach haya ma ra'a l'shtus zeh, page 2. What in the world was Korach doing? Why was he getting involved in this? High risks. Einoi hita'ato, his eye actually misled him. Why? Ra'a shel sheres gedola yatsa mimenu. He saw this incredible line of lineage that was descendant from him. Shmuel sheshakol keneged Moshe va'Aaron. So he says that I'm going to be the patriarch of Shmuel. That's why he saw this future lineage, and it was true. And he said, if Shmuel, who is, and it goes, says, Amar b'shviloi nimlot, I'm going to be saved because of my future. And he goes, he says, and my children will be part of the rotations of the Levium in the Beis HaMikdash. And he says, and I know that it calls Elo b'nei Abonim leHaman, and we know that Haman had many children who stood in the Beis HaMikdash. Amar efsha kol ha'gedula hazos asir la'amod mimeni va'ani Edom. It becomes what's called the Macbeth syndrome, right? Where I know what the future holds. I know my children are all going to be in the Beis HaMikdash, and I'm going to now keep quiet upon this opportunity that King Duncan is sleeping in my palace tonight, right? So I know I have all these children coming out of me, and now Moshe Rabbeinu is nominating his brother for the Kahuna Gadol, and I'm going to keep quiet. So he's sort of, right, this is the danger of self-fulfilling prophecies. Lekach nishtatev lavoi la'oisa chazaka sheshama mipi Moshe shekulam oivdim ve'echad nimlat. So he says, if Moshe Rabbeinu says one person is going to survive and the rest are going to die, he says, I'm pretty sure that one person is going to be me. Number one, because of this of my future. And in fact, he says, not only is Shmuel just an anybody, we know, as we say every Friday night in Tehillim, as we quote in the Kabbalah Shabbos, which is source 2, actually is one page back, Moshe v'Aaron b'Kohanov v'Shmuel b'Korei Shvoi. And this pasuk in Tehillim almost equates Shmuel and Moshe and Aaron. So with Korach, knowing that he's going to have Bnei Banim, who are going to be Haman and who are going to be serving the Beis HaMikdash. And he knows he's going to produce a Shmuel, and Shmuel is shakul, is weighted in spiritually Kamosh v'Aaron, and not in Nevuah, because lo kam Kamosh, but in some degree of leadership, Shmuel is weighted like Moshe and Aaron, and now he is putting himself against Moshe and Aaron. He says, well, if my future is equal to the two of you, that I have the worth to make this argument. That's his argument. So he's essentially putting all his eggs into this basket because he knows the future will hold true. What was his mistake? Well, I mean, this is all true. So what was his mistake? Yeah, his kids came through. He didn't, right? So it's a dangerous game when you start playing the future. He had children already. It wasn't like he was going to have children after this. It was the children he already had, and they, although they started with him, they did Shuvah and in fact became authors of Tehillim too. Now in Sadly Bnei Korach Mizmor, which happens many times as well. So they joined Haman as well, their great-grandchildren, later on, in submitting to Tehillim as well. So that's what the Rashi says. This is all famous. This is all no chidushim. We just went through the actual psukim that talk about this genealogy. Now I'd like to go into a little bit of a more uncharted territory. So I don't think that this is just happens to be happenstance. That it turns out that Shmuel is the person happens to be the patriarch of. I think there's much more which is actually similar. In fact, if we go back to Shmuel's life and Korach's life, Shmuel being the great-great-great-grandfather and Shmuel the great-great-grandson, there's a lot of parallels which exist, which I think are worth exploring. So as an example, you'll notice that when Moshe Rabbeinu wants to get rid of the challenger to his power and establishment, he doesn't just say, we'll have a public debate. that wasn't the way he figured it out. Moshe Rabbeinu says in source 4, you want to know I'm right? He says, I'm going to tell you something that happens. If Korach dies in an assisted living with his family around his bedside, then you know that I'm false, right? Then that's not me. V'im bria yivra Hashem upasasa adamas piyah bala esames kol asher lahem v'yardu chaim she'ola v'yadatem ki noatzu anoshim ha'ele es Hashem. I want you to know, if Hashem is going to create a new creation, something which never existed beforehand, and they die and the earth opens up its mouth, then that's it. Then you know that this is not a game. It wasn't me who appointed me, it was God who appointed me, and He opened up the earth in the same way. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. By the way, quick question: did Hashem tell him to do this? No, doesn't sound like it. Hashem did not command him not to say this. We know in Pirkei Avos that maybe the Piyah Aretz was created during Ben Hashmashos, but that doesn't mean that Hashem commanded him. That could have been that Hashem knew. That's omniscience rather than a gezerah that it would be. But nonetheless, he didn't. Moshe Rabbeinu was going out on a limb over here to say that I'm going to ask for a miracle in getting rid of these people. That's a pretty strong thing. And did Hashem listen? The answer is yes. Hashem came through for Moshe Rabbeinu. Interestingly enough, later on, Shmuel's leadership is challenged as well, and he is asked to be replaced by a king. And at the end of establishing the king, he says the following in source 5. He says, I want to show you something, says Shmuel to the people. This is now Korah's progeny. He says, it is the harvest of wheat today. What season is the harvest of wheat in Israel? When about is that? Around Shavuot time, right? So just a few weeks ago. And just a quick question in Israel. Does it rain after Shavuos? Never rains after Shavuos. Not until we get to Sukkot. It's dry all the way through. He says, Ekra el Hashem v'yitein kolos matar udu'u re'u ki ra'aschem rabo asher asisim b'nei Hashem lishol lachem melech. I want to show you that you are incorrect by asking for a king. It's going to have a rainstorm today. Vayikra Shmuel el Hashem v'yitein kol Hashem kolos matar v'yom hahu vayira kol ha'am me'od es Hashem ve'es Shmuel. And suddenly an incredible thunderstorm opens up, and people are terrified because they've never seen a thunderstorm in the month of Sivan, June time. Never been, and people are shocked. Again, Shmuel summoning an unnatural event in lieu of his leadership as well, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. But it gets more than that. If you think about it, what was the claim that Korach had against Moshe? The claim that Korach had was, your side of the family has claimed too much, right? There's a disproportionate amount of power in your side of the family. Great Kahas, he came from the other side, the Yitzhar side, and he said, well, your side of the family took Kahuna Gedola and governance. That's too much, right? King and Kohen Gadol. We need to remove the leaders who are not correct. Well, it is interesting because in Shmuel's own lifetime, it happens to be that there is an individual who holds both those stations in society. And his name is Eli HaKohen. Eli is a shofet, as we understand. He was the shofet at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, the coming off of Sefer Shoftim. So, and he happens to also be the Kohen HaGadol. He happens to be the high priest as well. And again, whenever you have perhaps a coalescence or convergence of different branches of government, we talked about this a little bit before, in one person, there's always problems. So we know that in fact, in Sefer Shmuel Aleph Perek Beis, that as he grew older, unfortunately, he may have been a tzaddik, but it did not work for his sons. Take a look at source 6. Ve'eli zakein me'od v'shama es kol asher yasun bonav l'kol Yisrael ve'es asher yishkavun es anashim atzavos pesach mo'ol moed. There was something going on. We don't know if this is literal or not literal. There's something going on with a power differential on the women who are coming to the Mishkan. Why are you doing this, says Eli to his sons? Al bonai, please my sons, don't kilo tov hashmu asher anochi shomea ma'avirim amashem. And he says, how can you do this? And in the meantime, and he says this is not a good thing. In Pasuk Kovi he says, V'nar Shmuel holech v'godel v'tov gamim Hashem gamim anoshem. So while Eli's sons are really not living up to their power, then Shmuel, who has no power, is a very young, very wonderful, upstanding, and respected young man. Now what happens is because of this, and because Eli does not take a strong enough stand against his sons and what they represent, an unknown prophet comes to him and tells him that you're going to be replaced as a Kohen. So we have this unknown prophet who tells this to us over the course of the next page. But what is interesting is what happens next. What happens is that Shmuel, if you remember, he is living in the area he's living in Shiloh with Eli. Why is he living in Shiloh with Eli? Eli's not his father. Elkanah is his father. Why is he living with Eli? Because that was the promise. Chana says, if you give me children, I'll bring my first child to you, Hashem. So she, when he's weaned, she dedicates him, as we remember in the Haftorah of Rosh Hashanah, she dedicates her son Shmuel to the Mishkan, and he, although he is a Levi, he serves amongst, right, remember, Levi because he's coming from Korach, okay? So not a Kohen, that was the whole dispute. So he is a Levi, he serves, and he is an attendant to Eli. And what happens is as he grows up, he is a very, very respected young man, as the Tanakh emphasizes numerous times in Perek Beis and Gimel of Sefer Shmuel Aleph. And he is asleep one night, and he hears a voice, and the voice calls to him, not realizing that this is his first experience of prophecy, he goes over to Eli and he says, did you call me? Eli says, I didn't call you. So he goes back to sleep. He hears the voice again. He goes over to Eli again. And after the third time, Eli realizes that Shmuel is hearing something. And so he says, go back and maybe it's Hashem. He listens to Hashem, and this is what Hashem says to Shmuel in source 8. I'm going to do something in Israel. If anybody hears it, their ears are going to ring, and that refers to, whenever you hear that, the idea of ears ringing, it refers to the destruction of a holy place, and that's about the destruction of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is going to be destroyed, right? This is in between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. I'm going to on that day bring about the destruction to the house of Eli on the day of the destruction on the Mishkan. Because he did not reign in his sons, who are representing the Kuna Gedola and leadership, I'm going to rain upon them what they deserved as representatives. I'm never going to allow them to get atonement. It's very, very serious. The sins of leadership, and that's what happens. And so Shmuel becomes the messenger. Shmuel becomes the messenger to power that is going to topple power ultimately. So he's the one who gives over the message that you know how this is true. On the day the Mishkan is destroyed, you will be killed, and that's what happens. Because what happens is that Chofni and Pinchas go out to battle against the Philistines. Chofni and Pinchas are killed. It's a terrible, terrible story. Right? Pinchas's wife is late-term pregnancy. She goes into labor. She dies in childbirth, has a child they called Ikovod. The lack of honor because of the destruction of the Mishkan. Eli hears about this. He's in his 90s. He falls off his chair and breaks his neck and dies on that day. Everybody, children, father, the whole thing. Terrible. The wife, everybody dies on the day of the Mishkan. And who is the messenger of this? Who brings this message? Is Shmuel, which is fascinating because here is, in a certain sense, the prototype of Korach expressing itself once again. Here you have, in this case, a real abuse of power, where you have the Kohen and the Shofet who are not living up to their calling, and the person who unseats them, or is the messenger of unseating, becomes this Korach progeny, who in the same way. Why? Because of misuse of power. It's what Korach was attempting to do, at least in his mind, theoretically. He was incorrect. But when he looks into the future, I wonder if he looked into this particular message as well. And it gets more because who becomes the leader instead of Eli, not the Kohen, because he's not a Kohen, but who becomes the leader, the Shofet, is Shmuel himself. So Shmuel the Levi takes the power from the Kohen in the situation, which was Korach the Levi speaking to Moshe and Aaron, really speaking to Aaron to take his Kuna Gedolah. Fascinating, right? But let's go a little further. If we fast forward later on, when Shmuel now has a king around him, and this king, his name is Shaul HaMelech, what happens is that Shaul does not always manage to listen to the straight and the narrow. He has his own ideas about things, and understandably. So one situation is where there is a situation where the Plishtim are attacking because his son, Yonatan, kills one of the representatives of the Philistines. The Philistines are the military power. They start attacking. There's no weapons. And Shmuel told him, in 7 days' time, I'm going to come here and I'm going to bring a sacrifice. And Shaul HaMelech is waiting, and Shmuel's not coming, and the more Shmuel doesn't come, the more people are leaving, and he's very worried. And so finally what happens is Shaul breaks under the pressure, and he brings the sacrifice to start the battle, and at that moment Shmuel HaNavi appears. And so in source 9, Vayochel Shivas Yamim Moed Shmuel V'lo bar Shmuel Gilgal Vayofetz Amei Alav. 7 days have come, the Shmuel's not arriving, the people are dispersing. Vayomer Shaul Hagishu Elai Ha'olav Hashlomim Vayal Ha'olah. He brings the sacrifice because he needs to give the people hope that they're going to actually do something. So he goes out to greet Shmuel. Wonderful to see you. What did you do? Says Shaul. I see the people are leaving. I'm going to be attacked. The people are leaving. I'm going to not have given a sacrifice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so I brought it. You made a mistake. Loi shamarta es mitzvahs Hashem Elokecha asher tzivach ki ata echir Hashem es mamlachtocha el Yisrael ad olam. Hashem has now taken away your kingship from forever. This, by the way, is a precursor to the Agag situation. The Agag situation was when he became deposed as a king in his lifetime. This did not depose him of his kingship in his lifetime, but rather his progeny. You no longer will be bequeathing the kingship to your children because of this, was what Shmuel was essentially saying to him. Here we have another situation where you have a leader who's not living up to snuff, who's not living up to what they're calling, and who is the person? Who is the person to depose that leader not living up to their calling is Shmuel, the Korach progeny. Fascinating. It might be that Korach looks into the future and says, look, I have a person who's so powerful that stands up to kings and Kohen Gadol and says to them, this is not working, and is successful at deposing them. He says, well, then if it's going to be a binary option, 0 or 1, and only one person's coming out, I'm probably that person because I'm doing the same thing. Mistakenly in his application to his own lifestyle. But now it gets more difficult. And in fact, what happens is and this is where the full circle comes in, and it's important to appreciate what happens. So I just want to see which is the best way to do this. Let's start actually on page 8. Okay, source 13. That is not the translation of the first pasuk, but in source 13, it's we know the beginning of our parsha is Vayikach Korach ben Yisrael ben Kahas ben Levi v'Dasan v'Aviram ben Eliyav v'On ben Perez ben Reuven. So this whole conglomeration of upset people get together. They get up in front of Moshe. You got too much. Everybody's holy. And they now approach Moshe and they say, how could you take all the leadership? How could it be that Aaron, you nominate your brother, and it's just the two of you, and our side of the family doesn't have anything, and why are Kohanim more better than Levi, and that whole business. That we know. But now the same thing happens in Shmuel's life. Shmuel now actually suffers the same thing. Because as Shmuel grows older, in source 14, Perek Ches in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, Vahi kasher zaken Shmuel, Vayasim es banav shoftim Yisrael, his children become leaders. Vahi Shem benoi abachor Yoel, v'Shem shnei Aviyah, v'shoftim be'Be'er Sheva, and his second son was Aviyah, they were shoftim down in south in Be'er Sheva. V'lo yolchu banav b'darko, vayito acharei abotza, vayikchu shochad, vayatu mishpat, his children didn't live up to it. And again, we discussed this. This is not taken literally according to most of the Meforshim. It means that Shmuel used to move from city to city and offer judgment and leadership in every city. And his children said, listen, it's a two-way street. If you want judgment, then come to us. If you have a problem, come to us. So the botza, the shocha that it's referring to is convenience. They didn't want to have to go everywhere. And if you want to come to us, you come to us. That was what was going on. But be it as it may, they weren't made of the same cloth that Shmuel was. That's what the people are saying. That's very not a very delicate way of saying it. You're old, your children aren't going in your way. We want somebody else instead of you. Shmuel is very upset about this. He's very insulted by this whole thing. So this is what happens, which is fascinating because ultimately, in a certain sense, although Korach looks into the future and sees that Shmuel is so powerful and Shmuel is carries out what he thinks he's doing in his lifetime in the future, in the end of the day, Shmuel faces the same music that Moshe Rabbeinu faces, which is sort of this dramatic irony in history, where now the shoe is on the other foot, where now suddenly the tables are turned, and now the Korach individual, right, the better Korach individual, which is Shmuel, is now facing the same music that Moshe Rabbeinu was facing. And in fact, in case you're wondering if this is a correct parallel, the reason why we bring the Haftarah of Parshas Korach is in fact from Shmuel Aleph about Shmuel, and listen to the words. So let's turn back a page to page 7, source 10 and 11. Moshe Rabbeinu says when he's attacked by everybody, he turns to me. So he is so hurt by this. He calls Dasan and Aviram. They don't come, and then he says. And they said, you didn't bring us to the land of milk and honey. In Pasuk Tezov, the last pasuk over here, in this quote, Vayechar Moshe Mo'od Vayomer El Hashem Al Teifen El Milchasam Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem and says, don't listen to any of their prayers or any of their meal offerings. Loi chamar echad mehem nosasi, v'loi hariosi es echad mehem. I didn't even take one donkey of theirs. I didn't take any favors. My leadership, I never got any benefits, kickbacks, submarine deals, nothing. So in the end of the day, why are they doing this to me? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Now you think that's the only person who said that in history? Incorrect. Listen to Shmuel. When Shmuel now is asked to be deposed, the people are coming to him and saying, very nice, we appreciate you and everything, and we'll give you a certificate, but we want a new leader. So Shmuel gets very upset. He finds a new king, appoints a new king. The king is proven, and then he gets up and then he gives him a speech. And this is a very serious speech. And at the beginning of the speech, he says in source 11 a very strong statement. Vayomer Shmuel called Yisrael. Hinei shamati b'kolchem lekol asher amatim v'amelech alechem. Melech, you wanted a king, I gave you a king. I replaced myself. V'ato hinei melech misalech lifnechem v'ani zakanti v'savti v'vonai hinam itchem v'ani salachti lifnechem enura v'arata. Okay, now I'm old. My children are with you, and I led you from my youth till now. Hineni anu bi neged Hashem v'neged Mashiach. Let's answer me, and in front of you is Mashiach. That refers to Shaul. Now, folks. This is a public statement which I don't think any leader I have ever heard make. Ever. Listen to what he says to the people. In the presence of everybody and the king. Es shor mi lokachti, v'chamor mi lokachti, v'es mi oshakti, v'es mi ratzosi, miyad mi lokachti, koife v'alim einai boy, v'asim lochem. Have I ever used or misused my power for you? Have I ever taken anything that was untoward in my entire career? This is a public statement he's making. That's very intense, in front of Hashem and them. I mean, there's got to be somebody, right? There's got to be somebody in that crowd who thinks that Shmuel misappropriated his property, right? Vayomru, and they said, Lo yashaktanu, v'lo ratzasanu, v'lo lakachta miyad ish muma. And it's remarkable. What leadership? 100%. No, but everybody says in unison, nope, nothing, Shmuel. It's amazing. Vayomru aleihem Hashem eid Hashem bochem ve'eid Mashiach yamazek im lo matzasem biyodim uma vayomer eid, and he says, I'm calling God into witness, the witness stand, to witness what you just said, that you just said, I never abused my power for you. So again, what's so fascinating is now that the shoe's on the other foot, you feel the indignance of Shmuel, who's now the Korach on the other side of the spectrum. Now Korach is the leader. This is Shmuel who's the leader, being accused or being deposed of, and he has to defend himself. And now he feels the pain of Moshe Rabbeinu. Did I do anything to you, he says? The same language. He's quoting Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, the Gemara says in Nedarim that Shmuel was even more vociferous, stronger than this. Let's take a look at the top of page 8. The Gemara says in Nedarim, La'amid Ches, Amar Rava, Gadol ma shenema b'Shmuel, Yosef minu shenema b'Moshe. Shmuel's claim was even stronger than Moshe. But Moshe Rabbeinu ksiv lo chamor echad men asasi. I didn't take a donkey of you dafilu b'sachar. Meaning to say, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I never even rented from you a donkey. Shmuel, it wasn't even without any money, even with consent, he didn't take it. So meaning to say, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I didn't forcibly, take any advantages of my leadership, and Shmuel says, with a consent, I had nothing involved. So Shmuel's even more vociferous of a response. And I just, you sense this incredible dramatic irony in history. Here is Korach who looks to the future and says, I've got a Shmuel, and that's the reason why I'm claiming against Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, that person you're looking to in the future is going to be standing in the same dock in just a few years' time, who's going to be defending himself in the same way because the people said the same thing to him. That's sort of like, the great machinations, the wheels of history turning now as Shmuel's on the other side. And now
it's the ultimate tshuva.
It's the ultimate tshuva. It's also the ultimate. It's also the ultimate din as well. But now I want to dig this a little deeper, because now we have the tools to be able to unpack this, which is that there's a lot of parallels here, right? So looking to the future, this whole idea is opening up. It's really quite astonishing. Now when we read the Haftarah of Parashas Korach, it's going to be a little bit different to have this perspective. But here there actually is a little bit of a difference in the claim against Moshe and the claim against Shmuel. And that's where the critical difference lies. You see, when it came to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was actually decentralization of leadership. When it came to Shmuel, it was change of leadership. Do you notice that? which is a little different. Although both of them are asking to be replaced to a certain degree, or the powers are asking to be replaced. When it comes to Korach's claim, it's the claim of Ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim u'madu tisnasu al kalam shem. Decentralized leadership. You have too much power in one bottleneck. That's what's really being said over here. We're all holy. We're all at Sinai. We can all have a part of this, right? Those 250 people, they also are shareholders. When it comes to Shmuel, that's not the claim at all. Which is why, in Shmuel's case, they ask not to make everybody a leader. They say, but we want a different form of leadership. We want a different type of government. They keep the establishment. They understand that there's still a role in having an administration. Just the type of administration is being changed, which is why, when it comes to Korach's model of rebellion fails, and Bnei Israel's form of rebellion or overhaul actually succeeds, even though it's deemed as a negative thing at the beginning when it's asked as well. Which leads to I think really an important part of this claim of Ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim. The notion that everybody's holy, everybody has a voice, is an important claim, but within context. And that's what I'd like to get to. There's a book, actually, Dr. Abramson suggested this to me many, many years ago, and I read it called Cognitive Surplus by Clay Shirky. Very interesting. He's a professor here in I believe in Columbia, one of the New York universities. Very interesting individual. And he wrote at the beginning of, this is an old book already, so this is already over a decade old, where he talks about the value of the collaboration the internet has created for us in society. So to give an example, just in his introduction, just a paragraph here on page 9, this book is about the novel resource that has appeared in Source 15, that has appeared as the world's cumulative free time is addressed in aggregate. The two most important transitions allowing us to access this resource have already happened. The build-up of well over 1 trillion hours of free time each year on the part of the world's educated population, right? So people have more time on their hands than they ever had beforehand. And the invention and spread of public media that enable ordinary citizens previously locked out to pool that free time in pursuit of activities they like or care about. These two common facts are common to every story in this book. So now, just let's talk about some of the examples of some of the things he talks about, some of the examples of the advances that he talks about in terms of lots of free time and the ability of everybody to be able to have a voice. So one example is, and this is a simple example for a moment, is of decentralization of the establishment is Waze. Waze is a great example of a very positive advance, where no longer am I relying on a satellite or a helicopter to look down and notice the traffic patterns and therefore give me, the consumer, the information, but rather I, as a consumer, am also providing the information by having an app open in my car, which is now going into a larger algorithm, which together will inform everybody else as well about the traffic patterns in real time, because we're all contributing to the larger algorithm of how traffic is working. It has reformed the way that people drive today. That's without actually actively being involved. But then on other sides, like let's think about today, publishing today as an example. So it used to be that since the times of Gutenberg and the invention of the printing press, it was an incredible revolution, right? So now you had the ability of people being able to proliferate the word, the Reformation being a product of the printing press, like Luther being able to print out his ideas and spread them at a rapid rate, uncontrollable by the church. An incredible revolution. But as the printing press developed, it became also a bottleneck as well, because every printer had to make a decision as to what they were going to print. And what was the decision usually based on? What it all comes down to? Money, which means to say that the printer will say, is your book going to get me money? Is it going to sell enough? So therefore, who controls the ideas in society is the person who owns the printing press, because they're going to say, is this idea worthy of printing? And if it's going to pay me back enough, then I'll print it. If not, who cares? And therefore, there was a certain level of, you could say on the positive side, well, a certain level of we'll call excellence demanded because of having to make the bar of printing. Or you could say, on the other hand, is that there's a limitation of the ability to be able to print if you don't make the cut or the like of that printer. What happened in the revolution of the internet is the decentralization of printing. I can, for free, get a Wix or Weebly a website, set it up without even getting a starter pack, and press a red button that says publish, and now billions of people can read my uneducated opinion anywhere, anytime, right? I no longer have to go through somebody else who is going to tell me it's all right or not all right to publish. I've decentralized ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim. We all have a voice and the right to be able to do that. That, in a certain sense, he views as a very positive thing, allowing many more people to be able to publish, many more ideas to meet the public eye than ever beforehand because of the aggregation of publishing. Let's go a little further. If you think about there was a website which was established in Kenya in 2008 called Ushahidi. Ushahidi means witness. And what it was an NGO, non-governmental organization, which was there to track violence in the country, non-fatal violence, when there were violent situations that happened because of a lack of policing, because of tribal fighting. And although the government was keeping track of these things, what ended up happening was this website, then the people who are working behind this enabled people to report not just by going onto the website, but even sending text or phone calls that something's happening. And it became such a powerful resource that the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard started taking note of this and started tracking violence in Kenya. And violence started tapering off in Kenya because there was oversight of other countries of what was happening in Kenya in more real time than what was happening by the Kenyan government reporting itself. How was that possible? Not because you waited for the central establishment to report or perhaps ignore the violence that was happening on the street, but because regular citizens were enabled to be able to report, and this is the power of social media. Think about in the early 2010s, the Arab Spring, and you think about the million people in the central square in Cairo as the people were fighting against President Mubarak, thank you, Hosni Mubarak at the time, and his immediate deposal based on conversation with President Barack Obama, who at the time says now, that was the word he used, which he stepped down. But how did a million people get there? The Arab Spring was a function of social media. It was because millions of people could get the information to each other without a government controlling that information for people to get together. And so if you look throughout, and it's worthwhile reading a lot about the collaboration that he talks about that's available through media, it's always a function of the tools today of Kikola Eda Kulam Kadoshim, which is the claim of Korach ultimately, which is that we don't need to have a centralized government or centralized force telling us or not telling us, ignoring, not ignoring. We all have a voice. Let's use that voice together and to its success. That was Korach's claim. But here's the flip side. And it comes down to what happens in yesterday's parsha, in Parshas Shlach. It says Rav Hirsch, and it's such a powerful thing. Most people skip this Rav Hirsch. When I read it the first time, the implications were so powerful when I read this Rav Hirsch. This is not where he talks about the main sin, but here's his observation. He says, you know what the biggest problem with the Meraglim was? He says they had important, sensitive military information. And you know where the context is to share sensitive military information? Is in a closed-door meeting in a bunker in Tel Aviv with the chief of staff and the generals of the army. That's where you share information of that note. But where did they share that information? In a public sphere. They called a press conference. Right? He says that was the sin. Think about this for a second. There's an importance today between information and the masses. And the question is, who is mediating that information? Who's moderating that information? And today there's no one who's moderating that information. Because, or perhaps larger search engines that are moderating that information at best, which is not moderation. It just depends which side of the political spectrum it is moving towards. But if you think about that for a moment, that means to say you're giving raw information to the unwashed masses. And guess what's going to happen when that happens? They're all going to start crying. Of course they're going to start crying because they have no idea what that information means. They don't know what it means to understand military information because they're not schooled in it, because they're not chiefs of staff, because they've never seen a battlefield, because they've never had any military training, because they're not qualified to understand that information. And so that's what's going to happen when you have the Meraglim. Obvious, says Rav Hirsch. Isn't this what's happening today? Today, you have the police department can be dealing with a situation where there was where a person died, as an example, and now every single American citizen is going through the body cam report and saying, well, was it right or not right? There's a police department which has the ability of being able to do its own research and be able to make its own judgments and court-martial. That's how due process works. There's a danger and there's an advantage. On the one hand, you could say, well, police brutality needs to end. And if there wasn't the fact that the public were looking at the body cam reports which are being submitted to the public, then nothing would be done. You're right. There is a tremendous advantage. On the other hand, the riots which happen because the public don't understand what they're watching, because they don't have the context of what they're watching, is also a terrible calamity. The danger of the decentralization or the lack of mediation of information to the unwashed masses is something which affects us. Going back to the Arab Spring for a second. Was the Arab Spring a great thing? Well, guess what happened when Hosni Mubarak left? Guess who filled his spot? The Muslim Brotherhood. If it wasn't for the fact that Sisi, who was one of the leaders of the army, took over with strong leadership, we would have real big problems in the Middle East today. Thank you, Arab Spring. Right? So, although at the beginning President Obama championed this idea of it wasn't freedom they were looking for, believe me. It was not freedom. They needed another dictator, but in the end of the day, that was not necessarily a good thing for Egypt at that immediate moment in time, if you want to put things back into perspective. Rabbi Sachs has a book called Morality, which I highly recommend to everybody, and he has a chapter which is called The Return of Public Shaming. And so just an example that he cites in a book called You've Been Publicly Shamed. It's a story about a lady called Justine Seiko, the director of corporate communications on the internet from firm AC. On December 20th, 2013, she was on a flight from New York to Cape Town. During a layover in Heathrow, she sent out a series of tweets intended to be humorous. One of them read, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white." Now, it's obviously a stupid message to send out, right? But she meant it as sarcastic or humorous, whatever else it meant. She waited for half an hour for replies, none came. The flight itself took 11 hours. During most of the time she was asleep. When she arrived, she discovered that during the time she had become the number one trending topic on Twitter. She had lost her job. She had been denounced by media bloggers, celebrities throughout the world. During the 11 days between then and the end of December, she was Googled 1.2 million times. And you say, well, maybe that's right. Maybe people should be more careful about what they say. But what was lacking in this again was due process. She didn't have a chance to even defend herself. She didn't have a chance to state her case. Because in the meantime, the public, the mob of social media had destroyed her. And you can't recover from those kind of things. And that happens again and again and again today. The public shaming, which is a function of perhaps the Kol Ha'eda Kulam Kedoshim model, which is everybody's got a voice. Well, when you let everybody have a voice and they're unschooled and they're not worthy of having an opinion about certain matters, then we have what we have today, which is the return of public shaming as well. This comes back to what the spies were doing. And I think that perhaps the Torah sets up the Meraglim in apropos to Korach because it's precisely the same issue, which is when you understand that everybody deserves a voice, you have to be careful. You need centralized leadership. And perhaps, although the shoe's on the other foot when it comes to Shmuel, notice that although they are replacing Shmuel as a form of government, they are not replacing him with the masses. And that's why it succeeds, ultimately, as opposed to Korach as well. Because in the end of the day, there is a need for a government. There is a need for centralization. And what I think the Torah is saying, what the Tanakh is saying in general, is there's a spectrum over here of the space of having accountability of leadership to the degree that Shmuel will be willing to be the harbinger of the news, of deposing of the Elis of the world who don't live up to the leadership, or the Sha'uls of the world who don't listen to their instructions. That is an expression of Korach's Ki Kol Ha'eda Kulam Kedoshim. You need to be accountable to the public. You do. But you also need to have a due process to be able to get there. Because without due process, without warning, without the ability to be able to defend oneself, then all anarchy breaks loose as well. And perhaps looking back to Tanakh, you look at what seems to be just a story about people in those days has a lot of relevance to today as well. A lot of relevance to trying to find that balance between mediating information and also giving voice to those who are oppressed at the same time, giving voices to those who need voices in today's society, while also trying to be able to mediate between what is true and what is not true in a post-truth world. Folks, I think there's a lot to be learned, Be'ezrat Hashem. I hope that there's a lot to be learned from this, Be'ezrat Hashem. Thank you so much, everybody.